Imagine the sky collapsing. The wind shrieks, ears splitting like a choir from hell, drowning out every trace of life and plunging people into absolute despair. In that fury, ancient trees are ripped out by the roots, floating in midair like scraps of weeds, while tens of thousands of razor-sharp fragments ride the gale, shooting forward like invisible arrows. The ground convulses. Entire city blocks are erased by muddy flood waves that swallow every sign of civilization. Towering buildings collapse, leaving wastelands of ruin in an endless sea of water before that destructive force. Humanity becomes weaker and more fragile than ever. And how much more catastrophic would that scenario be if the last shield standing? In today's video, we will face the most terrifying hypothesis in modern history. A superstorm slams in and brings down the Three Gorges Dam 2359, Hubei Province, China. The thick, suffocating night is torn apart by a growl that shakes the Earth's crust. The Three Gorges Dam is trembling. The reservoir level has crossed the deadly mark of 607 feet, turning that colossal block of concrete into a ticking water bomb counting down to zero. Tiny hairline cracks begin to seep out under pressure measured in thousands of pounds. Jets of high-pressure water burst out, razor-sharp, slicing through the air like invisible blades. At exactly 3 a.m., an emergency order from Beijing flashes a crimson signal across every control screen. Full discharge, release the floodwater, or accept the dam collapse. The chief engineer's trembling finger has no choice but to press the suicide button. The locks snap open. Billions of cubic meters of water stored for an entire year are unchained all at once, roaring like a crazed dragon and charging towards Southeast Asia at a lethal speed. Downstream, the gates of hell on Earth officially swing open. Tens of thousands of people sprint into the streets in soaked, disheveled pajamas. Chaotic headlights sweep across faces twisted in terror. The wailing air raid sirens, piercing and brutal, still can't drown out the screams and breaking voices of the crowd trampling over one another to escape. A man clings to the roof of a car, drifting freely, screaming his wife and children's names in hopelessness. Hands flail in the murky water. She grabs at anything that can float, but the savage flood sweeps everything away like cheap toys. No order, no humanity. Only raw survival instinct, surging at the thin line between life and death. According to global meteorological satellite data, global warming has turned the tropical seas into a gigantic nuclear reactor, pumping a crazed amount of heat energy into the atmosphere. And from that furnace, a monster was conceived. Not an ordinary tropical storm, meteorologists call it the Black Dragon. The Black Dragon does not follow the laws of nature. Instead of racing inland and weakening, it becomes the impossible. Its stalls blocked by a subtropical high, the beast turns into a massive pump, hovering over the headwaters of Asia's two greatest lifeline rivers, the Yangtze and the Mekong. The sky is no longer blue, nor is it the dull gray of rain clouds. It shifts into a sickly hue, sallow yellow mixed with bruised purple, like the color of a necrotic bruise on human flesh. And then the most sensitive creatures on Earth begin to react. On the Yangtze River, as it passes through Chongqing, residents watch the surface boil like a hot pot. Millions of fish, from tiny species to massive sturgeon weighing hundreds of pounds, fling themselves onto the banks in a frenzy. They thrash and die on the scorching concrete. Better to die dry than stay in the water. In the sky, flocks of migrating birds scatter in chaos, completely disoriented as the magnetic field is disrupted by an electromagnetic storm. They slam into the skyscrapers in Kunming, then drop thud after thud onto the streets, forming piles of blood-red carcasses at intersections. The hoarse, mournful cawing of crows echoes through the alleys like funeral horns, sending humanity off to its grave. But the most terrifying reactions are in the human body. 24 hours before the rain begins to fall, hospitals in Yunnan and Sichuan are packed. Not because of an epidemic, but because of a strange syndrome. Thousands feel their chests being crushed, as if a 1,000-pound boulder is pressing down on their lungs. Their ears ring, their noses start bleeding for no reason. It's the result of atmospheric pressure plunging suddenly to a record low. The air grows thin, yet heavy. Saturated with static electricity, pedestrians' hair stands on end, and their skin crawls as if thousands of ants are moving beneath the surface. An invisible sense of dread invades their minds, making everyone restless and desperate to run, yet with no idea where to run to. And then the sky tears open. Not rain. This is a deluge. The sky is like a massive reservoir, its belly ripped open, dumping its entire wet insides onto the world below. Raindrops the size of thumbs whip into faces, stinging like lashes. They slam into corrugated metal roofs like non-stop machine gun fire. Visibility drops to zero. High-rises vanish behind a white curtain of water in an instant, and at the meteorological and hydrological center, scientists stare at the radar screens, their faces drained of all color. The rainfall readings spike wildly: 4 inches, then 12 inches, then 20 inches in just 6 hours. A whole year's worth of rain is pouring down in only a few hours. This is no longer a disaster, this is punishment. Water crashes from the sky onto hard ground, with no time to soak in. It instantly gathers into violent flood cascades, sweeping away cars and trees, turning asphalt roads into raging rivers of death. But the most horrifying thing is unfolding silently upstream on the Mekong, the mother river of Southeast Asia, at a chain of 11 colossal step dams in Yunnan. The sensor network begins flashing red alerts. Numbers on the control panels jump to maximum. Water levels in the reservoirs rise at a rate visible to the naked eye. Warning lights strobe without pause. Operators scream into their radios in panic, but the only answer is the hiss of rain and the crackle of dead static. Warning, warning, pressure at dam number 4 has exceeded the safety threshold by 200%. The sound of metal twisting crack, crack, echoes from the dam's body. Reinforced concrete walls designed to last 1,000 years now shudder like fragile shards of porcelain before the water god's wrath. The automatic spillway jams clogged by debris and rocks from landslides blocking the discharge gates as the water rises higher until it spills over the crest. And the fateful moment arrives. In the central control room, surveillance screens abruptly go dark. The monitoring system loses power. Deadly silence blankets the room for a few seconds before a thunderous explosion erupts from the dam, shaking the very foundation of the operations building. This is no longer a warning. The Black Dragon has completed its mission. It has pumped the barrel full. And now the trigger has been pulled. The water mass accumulated from the headwaters, carrying the power of thousands of nuclear bombs, begins its destructive journey southward. It charges forward, carrying a death sentence for millions of lives in Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia. Its final destination, the lowest, weakest, and most vulnerable place of all, Vietnam's Mekong Delta. The nightmare officially begins. Boom. This isn't an explosion. It's the roar of a gigantic wounded beast. At exactly 12:05 a.m., gravity defeats engineering on the left flank, where the superstorm-driven torrent hits hardest. A 984-foot section of the dam collapses completely. This isn't water overtopping a levee. This is a 607-foot concrete wall, the height of a 60-story building, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Now, 39 billion cubic meters of water are unleashed at once. A wall of water over 328 feet tall rears up into the black, thick air, then crashes downstream with an initial speed of up to 62 miles per hour. The shockwave from that impact slamming into the riverbed triggers a man-made earthquake magnitude 7, shaking a vast region of South China. People here have no chance. They don't even have time to see the water. The first thing to hit is the wind. A blast of air shoved forward by the massive water plume becomes a compressed air storm, ripping roofs away, snapping power poles, and slamming tens of thousands of fleeing people to the streets. And then darkness falls. The wall of water slams into the city like a gigantic planer made of mud and rock. Riverside high-rise apartment blocks are slapped head-on as the surge smashes into their facades. Skyscrapers are snapped at the waist and collapse into the flood. A chain of horrifying blasts erupts, loud enough to drown out the thunder. Millions of shards, glass, metal, brick, stone, and crushed car bodies are ground together in the torrent, forming a cold river of debris lava. That lava sweeps over everything where it passes, life is erased. Bustling neighborhoods, parks, schools, everything is flattened. They're buried under a mud and rock layer tens of feet deep in less than 15 minutes. The skeleton of a city of 4 million people is wiped off the map. No borders, no roads, only a vast, raging river surging over a gigantic mass grave, and the insane flow from Three Gorges doesn't stop. It charges on with the force of a high-speed train, hunting for the next victims. The downstream Cascade Dams. Gejoba Dam, its younger brother, just a few dozen miles away, takes the Three Gorges punch head-on. It doesn't crack, it detonates. The hydraulic pressure is so extreme that the concrete is torn into dust. The combined mass of water from the two dams resonates into a double monster, growing bigger by the second, growing more savage by the second. The flood is no longer river water. It's a toxic mix of mud, animal carcasses, industrial chemicals from destroyed factories, and urban waste. It becomes a liquid saw, gouging the riverbed and completely reshaping the terrain. Bridges spanning the Yangtze, pride of Chinese engineering, are knocked down one by one like toy models. Support cables snap with a violent twang, whipping the air with a razor-deadly sound. News of Three Gorges' collapse spreads to Wuhan, the downstream megacity of 11 million people, about 10 hours before the water arrives. But 10 hours isn't enough for 11 million people. Wuhan breaks. The order of civilization vanishes in an instant. Law no longer exists, only the jungle law of survival. Roads leading out of the city become a gigantic motionless parking lot, blaring horns mixed with screaming, cursing, and gunshots. At high-speed rail stations, a sea of people tramples one another, climbing over heads, shoving the elderly, ditching luggage, desperate to squeeze onto the last trains, but the trains don't move. The national power grid has completely collapsed after upstream hydropower plants are destroyed. Darkness swallows the city. Only the weak glow of headlights remains, along with fires ignited by short circuits and riots. Those who can't escape the city begin a race upward. Skyscrapers become makeshift lifeboats. Elevators stop working. Tens of thousands cram into dark, suffocating stairwells, trampling one another to fight for the highest floors. Children's cries and desperate prayers echo inside sealed concrete boxes. But they don't know a brutal truth. When the massive surge arrives, it won't just flood, it will scour. Fast-moving water will chew into the pile foundations of riverside buildings. Those concrete lifeboats will become mass coffins when the foundations are ripped away. From a satellite view, you would see a sight that freezes the blood in your veins. A colossal brown scar over 6 miles wide rips through central China, spreading east like necrosis racing across a living body. The surface isn't calm at all. It heaves with gigantic whirlpools that swallow everything. Cargo ships weighing thousands of tons are tossed around like bottle caps. Shipping containers bob and slam into one another, erupting into sharp, explosive crashes. Inside that water is humanity's despair. Helicopter rescues become hopeless against the Black Dragon's still raging winds. The army's rubber boats flip the instant they hit the water. Tiny, fragile humans toss like toys in the violent current. They cling to planks, to floating billboards, drifting aimlessly toward the South China Sea. At makeshift field hospitals in the highlands, doctors watch helplessly as streams of injured people keep pouring in. They don't die from drowning. They die from multiple traumatic impacts. They die from infections caused by contaminated water. They die from anaphylactic shock triggered by a horror their minds can't endure. And even more terrifying, this torrent is carrying another deadly gift downstream toward the borders of neighboring countries. Millions of tons of silt, sediment, and toxic waste. It won't stop at any border. It will flow. It will spread. Three Gorges has collapsed. The safety valve of Asia has been destroyed. The beast is no longer under anyone's control, charging straight for the sea. And in its path, nothing remains intact. This chaos isn't a movie scene. This is the collapse of an era. Disaster never travels alone. It's like vultures when the first one dives to tear at a carcass. The whole flock swarms in. When the news that Three Gorges has shattered reaches Beijing, a chill runs down the spine of the leaders at the National Emergency Command Center. They realize a brutal truth. Three Gorges was only the first domino. The Black Dragon superstorm is still roaring, and the rain is still crashing down like waterfalls across all of southern China. Other colossal dams on the upper Mekong and at the headwaters of the Red River are now in the same critical condition. Three Gorges was in 48 hours earlier. The choice now is no longer whether to save them. The choice is who to sacrifice. If they hold the water, the dams in Yunnan will fail, triggering a double catastrophe that would be unrecoverable for China's own interior. If they release it, they push the water bomb onto neighboring countries. In panic and under pressure to protect what remains of the core infrastructure, the most painful decision in the history of hydrology is made at 2 a.m. The order goes out. Emergency bottom gate release across the entire border dam system. Unrestricted free discharge. This is a death sentence for the downstream. A violent, brutal, man-made flood begins racing toward the Vietnam border at the speed of an express train. In Lao Cai, where the Red River enters Vietnam, the border hydrological station records the water level not rising, but leaping. The graph on the computer shoots straight up into a vertical line. Just 3 hours after the release order from across the border, the murky, churning surge arrives and slams into Lao Cai City. There is no time to move belongings. Air raid sirens scream through the valleys of the northwest, their ghostly sound echoing between mountains in the black night. Border residents can only grab their children and run to higher ground, leaving behind homes and fields swallowed in an instant. Kok Yu Bridge shudders violently, as if about to splinter under the pressure of the current, dragging thousands of massive tree trunks ripped from old-growth forests. But the real nightmare is racing toward Hanoi. The usually gentle, poetic Red River is now a raging mud dragon. The water level at Long Bien Bridge blows past alert level 3, then level 4, a hypothetical threshold that never existed in any drill scenario. The Red River Dike, an age-old fortress protecting the capital, begins to groan. Hanoi doesn't sleep tonight. The entire city stays awake, gripped by a vague yet tangible fear. Rain from the Black Dragon's outer bands lashes faces with a biting sting. Under the sickly yellow headlights of military vehicles, tens of thousands of soldiers, young volunteers and youth brigades hurry, passing sandbags hand to hand, trying to reinforce the weakest sections of the dike. But the water is rising too fast. Hydrostatic pressure forces groundwater to bubble up right in the middle of the old quarter streets. Rumors spread faster than the flood. Social media is flooded with pleas for help and unverified reports of a dike breach on the outskirts. The panic begins to seep in. Supermarkets are stripped bare, not a single bottle of water, not a single pack of instant noodles. Gas stations are jammed with people wearing faces drained of spirit. At the capital's gateways, traffic locks solid, stretching for over 6 miles. Everyone wants to run, but no one knows where to run when the water is closing in from all sides. Hanoi, the heart of the nation, is pounding in chaotic beats before Judgment Hour. If the north faces the brute force of water pressure, then the south, the Mekong Delta, faces widespread submersion. The water from the Mekong headwaters, once unleashed from the Cascade hydropower dams, is no longer gentle, no longer depositing fertile silt. It charges downstream and collides with rising South China Sea tides and storm winds, forming a deadly pincer. A grotesque phenomenon occurs, a river tsunami. In Tan Chau and Chau Doc, Anjiang, people see a 10-foot wall of water creeping in from the Cambodia border. It isn't thunderous like the ocean, it's quieter, but more brutal. It glides over rice fields at harvest time, erasing green and replacing it with a deadly, muddy brown. Can Tho under siege. The water rises so fast people can't react. Nin Kio Wharf disappears. Kairang Floating Market, a century-old cultural icon, is devastated. Boats and sampans are flipped by waves, drifting aimlessly across an endless sea. The ring dikes that block salt water and floods are completely breached. A double disaster unfolds as seawater surges deep inland, meeting fresh water rushing down from upstream. This chaotic mix kills millions of tons of shrimp and fish in aquaculture zones. The stench of rotting seafood carcasses rises thick in the air, blended with the smell of mud, creating a suffocating, mourning atmosphere over the entire Mekong region. The nation's rice bowl, its food security backbone, is wiped out in a single night. When dawn breaks on the fourth day, the world is stunned to realize the scale of the disaster isn't contained within China's borders or Vietnam's. This is a chain collapse of the global economy. Shanghai floods its ports, among the busiest on Earth, are paralyzed and global supply chains snap instantly. Stock markets from New York to London to Tokyo all turn blood red, indexes plunge without breaks. Big tech giants lose their supply of components, factories shut down. A massive economic crisis bigger than the Great Depression begins to take shape. Governments convene emergency meetings. U.S. carrier strike groups and rescue teams from Europe are ordered to deploy toward the South China Sea, but they are powerless against the superstorm Black Dragon's remaining strength. No aircraft can take off. No ship dares enter the Iwal region. Humanity, with all its technology, satellites, missiles, artificial intelligence, can only stand and watch through screens, helpless, as nature erases and redraws the map of East Asia. In Vietnam, the government declares a national state of emergency at the highest level. The military is mobilized at full force for the fiercest peacetime war. A battle to wrest life back from the hands of the flood. But before nature's absolute power, those efforts look painfully small. Rescue helicopters skim low over the muddy water, dropping food onto rooftops, bobbing in the flood, where arms wave in desperation. No more borders. No more politics. No more rich or poor. Now, before the Great Deluge, everything is just fragile creatures trying to draw one more breath. The collapse didn't come from bombs or bullets. It came from water, the source of life, and now the messenger of death. The old world ended that night. What remains when the water recedes will be a completely different world, harsher, wilder, and far, far quieter. When the Black Dragon finally dissipates, the sun at last breaks through. But it isn't the dawn of hope. It's a black dawn. Light falls on a world that has died. No more car horns. No more clamor from Asia's most thriving megacities. In their place is absolute silence, the most ear-splitting sound of the void. A toxic mud layer, yards thick, cold and reeking, like a colossal burial shroud draped over the corpses of Wuhan and Shanghai, and spread across the once fertile fields of Vietnam's Mekong region. The skyscrapers, once symbols of humanity's pride, now stand alone, tilting in a sea of sludge like gigantic tombstones stabbing at the blue sky. Humanity was mistaken. We arrogantly believed we could chain water dragons with reinforced concrete, use technology to force nature to its knees. We built wonders to prove our power. But we forgot one basic law. Nature is never defeated. It is only patient. The collapse of Three Gorges wasn't just the fall of a structure. It was the collapse of the illusion that we can control nature. Those 39 billion tons of water are a brutal reminder that, before the power of the earth, our civilization is as fragile as a sandcastle before the tide. The catastrophe has passed, but the geological scars in humanity's pain will remain forever. And in this terrifying silence, if you listen closely, you can hear a low growl from deep within the earth. The question isn't whether disaster will strike again. The question is, when it comes again, will we have anywhere left to run?